So let's talk about the patriarchal thesis. What is the patriarchal thesis? Patriarchy is the oppression of women, and most of human societies throughout history were patriarchal, which means women for most of history have been oppressed. This is something that feminists have promoted as an overarching explanation or understanding of the nature of humanity and the nature of human history. This idea that women have, for the vast majority of history, been oppressed. They are still oppressed, but at least now, because of feminism, there is a political movement to throw off the chains of oppression and to liberate women once and for all from the evil suffering that they have experienced at the hands of patriarchy. Patriarchy, we defined it within the previous module in the introduction when we said that this just means the leadership and the authority of men. What the feminists will say is that yes, this is evil. This is inequality to have men in this position and not women. And when there's inequality, that is a clear sign of oppression and injustice. And again, if you want to understand how to analyze equality as a concept and its connection to ethics, take the course on liberalism, The Great Lie, in our course library. So this is the patriarchal thesis. It's saying that patriarchy is oppression and women for the most of history have been oppressed. And this is just taken as a given. It's taken as a basic, fundamental, indisputable truth. And unfortunately, a lot of westernized, liberalized Muslims have also adopted this understanding of history. And they project that onto the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They project that onto the entirety of the Islamic history and Muslim history. They will say things like, yes, our scholars did not have a clear understanding of women's rights. Our scholars were misogynists. Our scholars were anti-woman. I have heard certain well-respected Islamic authorities, academics, imams, who will repeat this kind of assumption about history and women's position in history. And this is the kind of narrative, actually, that is used to describe the beginning of Islam, actually. You'll have these imams or khatibs who will go on the mimbar and will say that in the past, before Islam, in Jahiliyyah, women were being mistreated. Women were being abused. They were treated like property. And then Islam came and liberated them from the shackles of oppression. And Islam came and gave women all of these rights and took away all of those Jahili practices. Okay, just look at the structure of that kind of narrative and you'll notice that it's exactly this patriarchal thesis. It's the same idea of women at a certain period were being oppressed, and then something happens where they are liberated and given freedom and equality. And so when Muslims use this type of argument, they are reinforcing the patriarchal thesis. They are reinforcing the fundamental myth of feminism. And so this is bad. This is something that's counterproductive. Arguably, in many ways, women had more choice in the time of Jahiliyyah. Women had more options. Like, this is actually recorded in the history of pre-Islamic Arabia, that sometimes even polyandry was practiced, where there would be one woman and multiple men who were having relations with her. And so this is a practice that gave women a lot of choice and a lot of power. Islam came and abolished that and said that no, women can't do this. Women can't be having premarital sex. Women can't have multiple partners. Women can't, choose certain things like divorce. The right of divorce is something that Islam does not give women. And unfortunately, because of this feminist narrative and this desire for equality in all circumstances, some Muslims have been confused on this issue of talaq. And there needs to be clarity on this. So just we'll go into more depth on this when we talk about family in this course and in other courses. But women don't have the right to issue talaq in Islam. Only the husband has the right to issue talaq. That doesn't mean that women can't seek divorce. Yes, of course, women can seek a divorce. And in certain cases, it might be very justified in being granted a divorce from her husband. But she does not have the unilateral right to tell her husband, I divorce you, and that be legally binding. She can't do that within Islam. Only the husband can issue talaq and say, I divorce you, and that be legally binding and enforceable. Now, there's other kinds of ways that a woman can try to negotiate to be divorced, like khula. This is something that also has been very misunderstood because there's a deliberate attempt to create this impression that Islam gives complete equal rights within marriage. But this is false. There aren't equal rights within marriage. There's a hierarchy within marriage, and the man has more authority in marriage according to Islam and the Sharia, as we'll discuss. And this is what patriarchy is. This is the patriarchy that's found in Islam. But khula is not some kind of female divorce. Khula just means that a wife can give up her mahar or some other terms of agreement in exchange for her husband to divorce her. So she can offer something like, okay, I'll give up my mahar, just divorce me. But the husband ultimately can say, no, I don't accept that agreement. I will not divorce you for that kind of exchange. The right, to have a right means you have the right to exercise something. And in Islam, the husband has the right to divorce. He can exercise that authority. A wife cannot. And in cases where she is legitimately being mistreated, like, for example, a husband that's not providing for her in terms of her nafaqah, her rent, for example, or her living expenses, her food expenses, her clothing expenses, or he's just he's physically harming her. Those kinds of violations of her rights as a wife, yes, she has rights, and her husband is violating those rights, then in that case, she goes to a qadi, to an Islamic judge, and he can issue the separation, what's called fasakh. So that's something that we should clarify very clearly right off the bat, but this is all contrary to feminism. It's all contrary to feminism because there's a difference in the rights and authorities between the husband and the wife. So that was just one of the many examples of how Muslims, unfortunately, some Muslim imams have tried to conflate and confuse what should be a very clear-cut matter within Islamic law. Within Al-Asna and everything that we teach here, we want to be authentic to what Islam actually is. Not this kind of liberalized picture or fantasy or myth about what Islam should be according to the eyes of feminists and liberals. We reject that. So we have to be accurate when we talk about Islam. So this extends to the narrative of the pre-Islamic Arabs were so abusive to women, and then Islam came to liberate them. The more accurate picture is that in certain situations, women had more liberty, more choice, more rights in terms of what they could exercise in pre-Islamic Arabia, and they had less rights or fewer rights in other domains. And then Islam came and created the proper balance of rights and liberties according to the guidance of Allah, according to the guidance and the revelation of the Quran and the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is a better and more accurate description of the transition from pre-Islam to Islam. Instead of adopting this feminist narrative that depends on the patriarchal thesis to characterize Islam as a feminist liberation project. And because it's not that. And to portray it as that is completely ahistorical. And it's also throwing Islam under the bus and basically making Islam less than this feminist ethic, this overall feminist ethic, which we're trying to critique. And I'm not the only one who has actually pointed this out, this problem with the Islam as feminist liberation. Feminist academics like Layla Ahmed, she's a professor at Harvard, she makes this point as well. She's written books and articles, many, on feminism and Islam. She's a feminist herself, and she says that this narrative is bogus when we actually look at the pre-Islamic Arabs and how their rules and regulations with women. In many ways, it was better than Islam in terms of the rights and liberties that women were given. And we wouldn't agree that they were better in that situation because we've already dispensed with this idea that more choice and more equality and more liberty, that's something that's inherently good, and that's something that's inherently positive that we want to pursue. We've already rejected completely that assumption. We've rejected it for this class. We've rejected it with a lot of reasons and argumentation in the liberalism course, A Great Lie. So that's granted that we reject that premise. But the fact that they did have more liberties in certain domains within prior to Islam as women, okay, that's a historical issue. And as I mentioned, that came with sexual choice, certain marriage practices, even with property. Like women could own property before Islam because Khadija, radiallahu anha, she inherited a lot of her business and her wealth from her prior husbands prior to marrying the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that was pre-Islam. She could inherit. She could be a wealthy businesswoman, well respected. That was prior to Islam. So we just need to get rid of this kind of feminist narrative when we're describing Islam, the history of Islam, because it won't stand to scrutiny. It won't stand to historical scrutiny, and academics will see it as just propaganda. Like we're just trying to portray Islam as a feminist religion. It's not true, and why are we, licking the boots of the feminists? Why are we trying to portray ourselves as something that we're not, and something that is actually so low and incoherent in the first place? So here is a quote, typical quote from a feminist that you'll find in any article, basically, regarding gender. The best paid jobs are mainly held by men. The unpaid labor mainly falls to women. Globally, 82% of ministerial positions are held by men. Whole fields of expertise are predominantly male, such as physical science and sciences, and women garner less recognition for their contributions. They have received just 2.77% of the Nobel Prizes for sciences. So this is a typical expression of the patriarchal thesis, like a small example that you'll find in any number of thousands and thousands of articles and mainstream media that are hammering this point over and over into people's heads, that women are being mistreated, women are being held as second-class citizens, blah, 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 blah. And they'll cite all of these statistics, like the fact that only 2.7% of Nobel Prizes have been granted to women speaks to some great oppression and persecution that women are suffering in the world today or historically. So the first thing that we can ask is, do unequal outcomes mean oppression? You can cite all of these statistics about how women are not making as much money in terms of average salary. Women are, not having the same number of Nobel Prizes. Women don't have the same number of positions as CEOs. Women are not in these ministerial positions or Congress or presidents of the United States or prime ministers are mainly men, not women. So this speaks to oppression. According to the feminist logic or the liberal logic, this makes sense because equality is perfect justice. So any lack of equality means there's been persecution or there's some kind of injustice to create that inequality. But if you think about it, well, maybe the inequality is due to difference in capabilities, difference in interests, difference in the ability to do certain kinds of tasks. Why is that not a possible explanation for unequal outcomes? In fact, it seems pretty obvious. Maybe women are not as interested in the physical sciences as men are. Why can't that be an explanation? The feminist response to that is that no, that's impossible. Men and women are exactly the same. That has to be the only explanation, right? That men and women are exactly the same in every way, in terms of their interests, in terms of their proclivities, in terms of their personalities, in terms of how they behave and how they think and how they operate, how they live. Men and women are exactly the same, which means that there's really no such thing as gender. This is the feminist explanation. So if there is more women in the physics department or the chemistry department, there are more male professors, there are more male engineers, there are more male ministers and CEOs and so forth. That must mean that women have been held back because they have the same potential to do all of those jobs at the same level. But this is something that is so obviously false, especially if you're a Muslim. We know that the male is not like the female. لَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. The male is not the female, as Allah says in the Quran. And when it comes, I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was in college at Harvard, there was a huge controversy because Harvard and all of these kinds of high-level academic institutions had gone criticism. Why does the physics department or the chemistry department or the math department, why are these male-dominated? Why aren't there more women who are in these positions within physics and chemistry and math? And this shows that institutions like Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Oxford, they're biased. They're deliberately not. There are so many amazing female chemists and physicists and mathematicians, but Harvard is a boys' club, and they're holding women back. They're deliberately preferring to hire males over females. That's the feminist explanation. The president of Harvard, Lawrence H. Summers, he came and gave a lecture to a small audience, but it was an audience that included some journalists and bloggers, and he gave an explanation. He said that, well, when we look at intelligence, that men and women have about the same average intelligence when you look IQ tests. And IQ tests are significant because it's a measure of a person's ability within the quantitative sciences. So it's very relevant for physics, chemistry, mathematics, any of the hard sciences. Higher IQ correlates with higher levels of ability within those subjects. So the professor, or this president of Harvard, Lawrence Summers, he's giving this argument that when you look at the bell curve, or you look at the average intelligence of men and women in terms of IQ, it's about the same. But men have a larger spread in terms of IQ. So what that means, if you know what a bell curve is, you don't need to know what a bell curve is, but if you do, it means just there's a wider range. You have men who have much lower IQ than the average. Several standard deviations below the average IQ. So you find men, when it comes to mental retardation, there are more mentally retarded, challenged men than women. males than females. This is a biological fact. It's a demographic fact. But on the other end of the spectrum, with high IQ, the highest IQs, there are more men in those with those high IQs as opposed to women. So there's just this larger spread. The average for men and women is about the same, but there's just so much larger spread or range of IQ for men than women. So what this means is that the people with the top intelligence, the top IQ, are going to be males, and therefore you have a larger pool of men who are going to be in these top positions at these elite universities. You're going to have more men who are winning the Nobel Prizes and so forth. This is the explanation that Lawrence Summers gave, and he got hammered for it. He got absolutely hammered, and he was blasted in the media, and he ultimately had to resign as president of Harvard because of these comments that he made. Now, I was a student at Harvard at this time, undergraduate student, and I took a course in anthropology, and the professor was a female, and she said that President Summers is absolutely right. His analysis of intelligence and the differences in intelligence between male and female are absolutely correct. And so he's being unfairly maligned by these feminists who are denying something that is a clear biological empirical reality. So I give this example as unequal outcomes sometimes are just representative of a dissimilar or differences between males and females. That's all that it actually in many cases represents, because as far as, especially in the freedom-loving feminist West, there's already all kinds of laws that prevent gender discrimination. You will get in a lot of trouble to discriminate against people on the basis of their gender. So, and these things have been on the law in the books for many decades now. You know, all of these reforms kind of took place in about the late 60s and 70s, as we will see when we study second wave feminism. Title IX, especially when it comes to colleges. So the law already prevents discrimination, but you still see these unequal outcomes. So why is that? And the feminists will have a certain explanation that we'll see, because you'll point to differences in IQ. Right? You'll point to differences in the personalities between males and females. And they'll have more of an explanation. They'll say that, well, maybe we treat babies differently. Maybe we treat male babies differently than female babies. And that's what causes the difference in IQ, the difference in interests that creates these unequal outcomes. So the feminist basically pushes the explanation further back in time, but ultimately this explanation will fail, as we'll see. But for the simple reason that you can go all the way back to the womb, and you can look at the different hormones that a baby or a male fetus is exposed to as opposed to a female fetus. There are major physiological differences, hormonal differences from when we are in the womb that explain, way prior to any kind of socialization, that explain the differences between male and female personalities, potentialities, proclivities, behaviors, and so forth. So and this is something that is known. So even at that time, 20 years ago, within this anthropology department, the female professor is railing against feminism because the feminists are completely divorced from biological reality. Their explanations are divorced from a clear biological reality, and the whole socialization thesis makes no sense. And we'll look more closely at that in a minute. So another kind of response to this idea that unequal outcomes means oppression and persecution is that, well, it means that men also are oppressed. Because in a lot of things, that men are unequally represented in a lot of negative things. So men have lower rates of graduation from grade school and even from college. You have now more women that are graduating from institutions of higher learning. You have more women who are getting PhDs. So does this mean that men are being oppressed? Men have more suicides. 73% of suicides are male. There's also a higher suicide rate. So not only you have more males committing suicide, but in terms of the proportion of the population, they have a higher suicide rate. They have much higher incarceration. Almost a 10-to-1 ratio of men that are being put in prison. And then if a feminist says, well, that's because men are more violent. Okay, well, why are men more violent? We can do the same kind of analysis and point out that, oh, this must mean some kind of anti-male socialization that is making men more violent. And who's responsible for the socialization? It's women are also playing a part in that. Higher prison sentences, 63% longer prison sentences for the same crime. Men and women commit the same crime, but men on average are getting 63% longer sentences. How is that not a clear indication of oppression and persecution if we use this feminist standard? More workplace deaths. Men work more dangerous jobs. Men are the ones who are pouring concrete. Men are the ones who are building the skyscrapers. Men are the ones who are going into the mines, the coal mines. Men are the ones who are doing the deep sea oil drilling. They're doing the more dangerous jobs. Women are not represented at all in these kinds of jobs. Less than 1% or 2% of women are in these lines of work. So more workplace deaths are going to be happening for males. More military deaths, obviously, throughout history. How is that not a clear indication of oppression? If we take this feminist standard, that wherever there's an unequal outcome, that means that there's some oppression that happens somewhere down the line. There's some kind of socialization that happened. Maybe it's at the level of childhood, maybe it's at the level of adolescence, but there had to be some kind of oppression that explains this unequal outcome. Well, if we apply that even-handedly, then there are many cases where men are not doing as well as women, but the feminists ignore all of this. So the natural conclusion is that there should be a better explanation for these unequal outcomes than just malicious oppression or malicious socialization or this kind of patriarchal thesis that men being in authority means that women are being oppressed. So another core issue. So I think that we can go back and forth on statistics all day long, but the core issue here, and we're always interested in getting to the core issue at Alesna, does hierarchy mean oppression? This is another assumption that a lot of people have, a lot of liberals have. Why? Because liberals are emphasizing equality. Everyone needs to be equal. Any lack of inequality means injustice, means oppression. This is what we should criticize and question. We've done a lot of that already within the course The Great Lie, Conceptual History of Liberalism. But let's just think about it. Why should hierarchy mean oppression? Even within liberal societies, the ideal liberal societies, in liberal theory, they have hierarchy because you have to have a chain of command. You have to have authorities. You have a president, you have a prime minister, you have the governance system, the structure of governance. There has to be people who have more authority. You have police, you have military generals, this is something that's required, and it's something that's required because of human nature. Human beings, in order to flourish and in order to just survive, you have to have a chain of command because you have to organize against threats. So think of hunters and gatherers. a tribe of people. If every person is just going to decide for him or herself what to do, then there'll be chaos. There can't be an organized response to, for example, an enemy tribe that wants to come and kill you all or enslave you all. Or what if there is a pack of wolves that is going to attack your tribe? What is the way to respond to that? You can't everyone just think for themselves, for himself, everyone just decide for himself. No, you have to organize. You have to say, okay, we have a leader who is going to make the executive decision for what we have to do. We can contribute with our opinions, but at the end of the day, this person we have chosen because he is more wise, because he is more physically capable, because he has these qualities, to be able to make the best decision for the survival of our group. This is something that is very clear within tribal societies of this day, which, by the way, are all patriarchal. And they decide on the basis of a tribal hierarchy. It's something that's necessary for survival. And that's why we see it over and over and over again. So if it's something that is a necessity, how can it also be inherently unjust, inherently evil, and inherently malicious? You have this hierarchy that's needed for survival. If you don't have this, you will die. How can that also be something that is evil and wrong and unjust? Especially if you're an atheist. If you're an atheist, one of these liberal atheists, your entire understanding of what is right or wrong is based on a kind of consequentialist utilitarian morality. Whatever is leading to the most happiness is good, and whatever decreases happiness is evil. This is our whole definition of liberalism and utilitarianism, as we've discussed in the previous courses. But the survival of the group depends on hierarchy. That's what's going to lead to survival, which is better in terms of overall happiness than death, everyone dying, everyone being eaten by wolves or killed and massacred by an enemy tribe. So by definition, by a liberal utilitarian definition, the hierarchy is something that's morally necessary. It's not only morally justified, it's morally necessary, so it can't be evil. So hierarchy in that specific case means that can't be malicious or oppressive or persecution. What about in other cases? What about in bigger societies, agrarian civilization, agricultural civilization, modernized civilization? Can we just get rid of all hierarchy? Well, we've never seen such a system. We can't see how such a system could ever work because you also face the same kind of problems that the hunter and gatherers have faced in terms of the threats and the need to make decisions in an organized way so that society can function. Without that, you have just complete dysfunction. So these equality fetishists, if you want to call it that, they have not presented a compelling model for how you can have a society that is where everyone has exactly the same authority and how that would be functional, how that could actually work. They haven't even properly conceptually presented that, let alone actually implemented it so we can see such a thing work in real life. We haven't seen that. And there's all kinds of theoretical arguments against such a absolute equality, a liberal equal system with everyone at the same level of authority. Robert Nozick famously made an argument against John Rawls with his liberal explanation of complete equality, political equality throughout society. It just doesn't make sense. Even people willingly, that's the thing. What Robert Nozick gave the example of is his famous Wilt Chamberlain thought experiment. Wilt Chamberlain was this historical basketball player. So like, look, let's give everyone the same amount of money in society. So everyone has the same authority, everyone has the same power, everyone has the same wealth. But there are certain people that are naturally more capable. They have certain talents, they have certain kind of intelligence, they have certain abilities. People will voluntarily pay those individuals to entertain them or to help them or to, like, for example, if you have a society with this famous or with this talented basketball player or this talented juggler or talented dancer, people will willingly give up part of their wealth in order to be entertained by that person. And that person will accumulate wealth. When he accumulates that wealth, he will become more powerful. So you have a system of complete equality that quickly will evaporate because people are voluntarily giving up their power. So it's a very simple thought experiment, but you can see like it completely demolishes this ideal that liberals want to create, philosophical liberals. Hierarchy is the nature of existence. So we've already talked about how hierarchy is ubiquitous in all societies, including secular ones. It's everywhere. But it's also the nature of existence. So this is something important for Muslims to recognize. In existence in its entirety, we have a creator. Allah, he's the one who has all authority and all power. And no one can compete with him. No one can even have a fraction of the power that he has. So that's hierarchy. That is the nature of existence between the creator and the created. So that if hierarchy means oppression, then you are attributing injustice and oppression to Allah. And that is, of course, kufr. So as Muslims, we clearly have to get rid of this kind of principle. And then also when it comes to the Anbiya, the prophets, they are also authorities over people. There's a hierarchy. Allah has chosen certain people to be in this position of nubuwah, to have this nubuwah, to be prophets, to be messengers. There's a hierarchy. That's what Allah has chosen. Allah has written hierarchy into humanity itself. He's written it into the entirety of nature and the creation, but he's also written into humanity. All of the Islamic political structure, all of Islamic family structure, hierarchy is there. So just on that basis alone, you can't have a Muslim who accepts that hierarchy means oppression. You can't be a Muslim and accept that because it contradicts your deepest beliefs as a Muslim. And if you are going to compromise those deepest beliefs, then that endangers you from leaving Islam entirely. So those points should be enough to completely defeat feminism or this idea of hierarchy being oppression. But we can go even deeper. We can go even deeper. We can ask, are men really interested in oppressing women? This is a question that we should reflect upon. So in the next module, we will, inshallah, talk about it.